In this episode of Cream City Conversations, I sit down with Callie Gay to talk about her amazing journey from an evangelical childhood in the Christ-haunted South to a blossoming young adulthood in Milwaukee's Orthodox Jewish Community. Along the way, she encountered extremism, sexism, and isolationism. But she ultimately re-encountered Christ under the watchful eye of St. Joseph in a hospital room on Milwaukee's North Side. Years later, she would leave Protestantism and Judaism in order to become Catholic. In the Roman Church, the very last one she explored on her path back to Christianity, she found compassion, reconciliation, and an environment where she could question and search for meaning without repercussions. Take a look at my conversation with Milwaukee Catholic Herold's Callie Gay. Callie, thank you so much for this opportunity to enter into a conversation. You're not from Milwaukee originally. You grew up in Georgia.
That's right. Yep.
You were born into an evangelical Christian family. Mm-hmm. Tell us what that was like.
So I had a great relationship with the church growing up. We went to church a couple times a week, and I had a really great youth group and good friends and really good leadership for the most part. But my family, my stepfather, when I was about 13, my mom married him, and he was really abusive. And so at that point, he was also very active in the church. So at that point, it really started to make me question how you could be both. You know, I mean, how could you preach on Sunday and then come home and do things like that? And so that kind of started me questioning, you know, what is this? And also a big problem that I found when I began to ask, you know, I asked members of authority and my youth pastor and people that I was close to, how is this possible that you believe he's saved, right? You believe that he's holy. And they would say, like, faith, you know, you don't need works, you need faith, that's all. And so I kind of checked out around, like, I think 10th, 11th grade, and started looking for something else, you know, because I had a very firm foundation of God in my life. And I know there are a lot of atheists, but I didn't know any. I don't think that I really knew that it was a thing you were allowed to do. And it wouldn't have been something that I would have been inclined towards anyway. So I thought, like, okay, this isn't working. What else is there? And I started reading. And I also, at the same time, I needed to be angry at someone, and I really couldn't. It wasn't safe to be angry at home, at my parents, or certainly, you know, my stepfather. And so it was really easy to be angry with Jesus because, you know, he's the one that they say, you know, he cares about you, he's with you during every trial. And, you know, you don't realize as a kid, he really is sitting with you in that pain and hurting with you, you know, and that doesn't really mean anything. I don't think you can really understand it. So it was easy to be mad at him. And I thought, well, I just have the wrong religion. That's what it is. So as soon as I find the right one, everything will work out. And I'm a big reader, so I started reading, and I landed on Judaism.
What were some of the things that you read that led you to Judaism?
Some of the books that I don't remember any specific books, but I loved that it was that you were bound by the law as a Jew. You know, I loved that there were things that you had to do, and that there was a way to worship God. Something that I didn't love about being, you know, non-denominational evangelical growing up was that you kind of just could do whatever you wanted. You know, prayers were just talking to God. We didn't even say the Lord's Prayer. I mean, they were really kind of anti-written prayer. Wow. So I loved that. I loved that there was like a book called a sitter that you would pray in 3 times a day. And I loved that. I loved that, like, when you woke up in the morning, you washed your hands and you said a prayer. Like, after you go to the bathroom, there's a prayer for everything. Before you eat or drink a cup of coffee, like, you say a prayer. And I loved that. And it seemed like what I wanted.
So faith and law and ritual seemed separate to you.
Yes.
And law and ritual seemed safer than faith. And that drew you in.
Right.
But it wasn't until you went to Israel, right, that you actually encountered it in the flesh, so to speak.
Right.
Is that right?
Right.
So tell us about that.
Right. So that was the first time that I saw biblical Judaism, you know, I mean, as much as it exists today, because I went to a Reform synagogue in Georgia. And so they were lovely. They were great, just warm and kind, but they didn't.
And for those who might not know, Reform Judaism would be
very liberal.
Okay.
The most liberal.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
So they didn't follow the law, I mean, at all. They met on Friday nights before the Sabbath, but that was pretty much it. And not to minimize it. There are lots of people who love Reform Judaism, but the law doesn't really exist too much there. So when I was a nanny, I became a nanny in Israel, in Haifa, and for a modern Orthodox couple. So that was the first time that I saw kosher, and Shabbos and all of those things. And I just thought, like, wow, that's really what I want. That's how I want to live my life, so that every breath and every moment is about God. And here it is.
So it seemed a complete, all-encompassing kind of culture.
Yeah.
Rooted in Torah, rooted in law and ritual.
Right.
That seemed to offer you a solution to your antagonism, so to speak, with Christ. But you didn't become Jewish in Israel.
Right.
You had to come home to do that, right?
Right. It's very hard to convert
Okay.
to. So if I was going to convert, I really... I wanted to be Orthodox. I kind of thought that I wanted to be modern Orthodox because that's what I lived with and saw. But there's no real method of conversion for modern Orthodoxy. You have to go to an ultra-Orthodox based in. Like, they kind of hold the authority over that. So to do that, you have to become a part of their community. And ultra-Orthodoxy, just like, it's similar to modern Orthodoxy, but just it looks slightly different. Like, sometimes modern Orthodox women can wear pants, but an ultra-Orthodox woman would never be able to wear pants. Ultra-Orthodox women cover their hair with wigs, that kind of thing.
What separates Orthodoxy from modern Orthodoxy? Aside from these examples, is there just different rabbinical authorities, different readings of Torah, or what's the breakdown, the line of distinction?
Yeah, so it's different. It's when I kind of entered into it, I thought maybe it's like the difference between like Methodists and Presbyterians, but it's not. It's really the level at which you follow the law. And so now, like, with all of the years of experience I've had with it, I can see there are some modern Orthodox people that are they really follow the law, probably the heart of the law much more than ultra-Orthodox Jews do. But really, when you look at it, it's just about the level of observance. And then I think, like, after modern Orthodoxy, it hits a point where it's like, okay, now it's fundamentalist, right? Like, now you're telling people they have to do this or they lose their livelihoods. Right. But modern Orthodoxy really is just, it's following the law to their own interpretation.
So you encountered it again after Israel in Georgia.
Right.
But it wasn't until you came to Milwaukee that you found your way into an Orthodox community, is that right?
Yeah, so they have to turn you away 3 times, which they did in Atlanta. And then I happened to be in Wisconsin, and I just Googled, ultra-Orthodox synagogue, and I found the one that in Milwaukee. And so I went to them and I kind of explained everything that I'd been through, and they didn't turn me away at all. I mean, so I think that it kind of works that someone turned me away 3 times. So they didn't. They let me enter into learning for conversion, which is kind of you have to immerse yourself in the community and move there and live with a rabbi and his wife. And
So you lived with under the same roof?
Yeah.
What was that experience like?
At first it was really neat. I loved Shabbos. The Shabbos table was kind of the thing that I always say really hooked me in. It's just this big table set beautifully every Friday night, and the family gathers around, and you have guests, and they're singing, and it's just like a really beautiful time. And so partially it was great because you got to be a part of that, and you kind of became a part of the family and things like that. That was where I started to see certain things that I realized, okay, I'm going to have to close one eye if I keep going into this.
What were some of those things?
Ultra-Orthodox men don't really have a whole lot to do with their family as a whole. Like, they do, you see it on Friday nights and Saturday at the Shabbos table again. But other than that, they don't really have that much to do with them. And so it's the wife running the home and working in a lot of cases. They don't educate the women, but and it might be a little too much to go into now, but a lot of the men are Ph.L rabbis, which means they learn full-time. They just learn Torah. And so they don't really make any kind of money. And that's the ultimate, that's who you want to marry. As a young Jewish girl, you want to marry a Torah scholar. Yeah, I mean, it sounds crazy, but usually you'd be coming from a rich family. That's how, and so the family would support you. But in the cases when they don't, then the woman has to go get a job. And usually she doesn't have a degree, so it's not a very good job. So she's working hard. Wow. And that was the first place that I saw that, they really work themselves to the bone. Right. And you kind of say, well, that's beautiful, right? They love their family. And I didn't have that at all. And I wanted family more than anything. That was my ultimate goal. So I just thought like, oh, I won't marry someone like that. It'll be that easy, right? But you don't get to choose really who you marry. So it wasn't up to me.
So you did marry in this community. And like you said, it wasn't up to you.
Right.
It was arranged.
Right.
Who arranged it? How was it arranged? Tell me about that.
So it's funny because a lot of the things, like if you ask them, if you talk to the rabbi now, he would say, well, I didn't force anyone to get married. But it's set up in a way where I was 20, and that's considered very old for the community.
Wow, to get married.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I was a convert. So they kind of opened with, you realize no one's going to want you. You're old, and you're a convert at 20.
Wow.
And they knew that I had been very severely abused. So like not a great thing to tell to any girl, but for sure to somebody who you know is going to listen to you, because this is the only authority I had in my life, and it was a comfort, and I was going to do what they said. Wow. So they were like, you should just, whoever will take you, you need to just make work. If they're nice and they're not abusive, we'll make sure not to set you up with someone abusive. They say things like that. And you go, okay, well, all I want is a family. And at that point, I hadn't gone through therapy yet, so I didn't know anything really. I was still very damaged. And so you just kind of convince yourself that like, this is the life that I said I wanted. And all of these things that I'm seeing, you kind of learn different parts of the law. That's the other thing is like, they don't tell you when you're converting about parts of like the mikvah, right? Like the ritual bath when you're unclean. They don't tell you things all of that, like that go into that kind of thing. And yeah, it adds up. It all adds up to, I don't know if I want to do that. I don't know if I'm comfortable with that.
Right.
But everything is the rabbi's authority over the community. Like you can't report an assault in the community to the police before you report it to the rabbi. You can't report a rape or molestation. And if you do, you get in trouble.
Wow.
Yeah.
So these rabbis are regarded with an almost, I don't know, how would we say it, almost a divine authority.
Absolutely divine.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah. And there can't be questioned.
No.
There's no sort of appeal process to a higher authority.
No.
What they say is what they say, and that's it.
Yep.
So, and in this community, you're finding yourself more and more anchored.
Yeah.
You're entering into an arranged marriage, right? You're considered at 20 already old. What is the average marrying age?
Well, so there's a sweet spot, right? Like 19 pretty much, like at 20, something is wrong with you, which is crazy because but if you understand that like the girls go from high school when they're 18 and they have, in the community that I'm from, a lot of girls will get married at 17 or 18.
Okay.
But in the community I'm from, they consider themselves like more modern. They wouldn't say modern, they would use a different word, but they're not. They send their girls to seminary in Israel for a year to learn, but really just to get ready to get married.
What women learn, though, is different from what men learn. Is that right? Okay.
Yes. So women learn the family purity laws because that's a big deal. If you touch your husband when you're bleeding at all, you nullify his prayers because you're unclean. So it's a big deal. You're the keeper of those laws, right? And so if anything goes wrong in your family, the rabbi will first ask, like, what have you done? Like, have you?
It's your fault. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so you learn that, and you learn kosher, and they teach you kind of other, like how to get married, right? Like what to do, like you need to lose weight, or you need to like all sorts of things to get married, because that's your highest.
That's a lot of pressure on a person. Yeah.
Yep.
And it all comes down to you as the individual, right?
Right.
But yet at the same time, you're also being entered into an arranged marriage, right?
Yeah.
And how did you approach that arranged marriage? I'm wondering, at a certain point, you had to submit to this, right? I mean, you had to choose this.
Yeah.
This had to seem an appropriate path for you, right?
Right. So I was either going to have to get married or make aliyah, which means immigrate to Israel. There was really nothing for me in the community. As an unmarried woman, there's nothing for you to do. So they said, like, oh, you can go to seminary. Like they have seminary for older girls who aren't married. You could go there, or you can get married. This guy is nice. He comes from a good family. He for sure won't hit you. We've asked. I mean, these are all things that you're like they'd tell you if they, And so,
are there people who are in arranged marriages with people who are abusive?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. There's like a hierarchy. If something's wrong with you, you're married off to somebody who something is wrong with.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah, it's very, very toxic.
And there's no appeal process there.
You're allowed to get divorced.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, you are.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you can get divorce is very common, but there are problems with it too. I mean, you might lose the kids, you might lose, there are problems.
Is the preference for the kids that they go with the father, or?
Yeah. Well, okay. That it varies based on community.
Okay.
But if they go with whoever is more religious.
Okay.
So women lose their children all the time, and men lose their children all the time.
And you, as a convert, would you have been considered as religious? Would you have had equal standing with somebody born into Judaism?
I don't know. I mean, all I know is that the minute that I got pregnant, they said, well, if you leave, you lose the kids.
Wow.
So that was kind of always there over my head. And they weren't always mean about it. It sometimes was said in like an indirect way, like, oh, women who leave the community, they might lose their children. And you see it happen all the time in every community.
And in these situations, losing their children, doesn't necessarily mean only or limited to custody. That could mean you don't see them ever again.
Yeah, never again.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
There are, and it's more problematic in Israel, where the religious authority is the legal authority. But the courts here, I mean, the rabbis here have say in the courts.
Wow.
And it's not.
Why do they have say in the courts?
I mean, I don't know that I can go into it so much,
Sure.
but it's a thing that happens. There is a reason why if you call and you report a child sex abuse case, like from the school, or if you've seen something, or those calls somehow get kicked back to the rabbi because he can take care of it.
This is on the side of the secular state authority.
Yep.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And I think a lot of it probably has to do with just the volume of issues there are in the city, where it's like, well, this guy seems great, like he seems like he will take care of it. I don't know how, I don't know how, but all I know is that there is a big reason to be afraid that legally it will sway towards the side of the Orthodox. Sure. if you're in a situation where you have to get divorced.
Wow. Mm-hmm. So in the middle of all of this, at a certain point, you begin to, how would you put it in your words? You began to have friction with the community, or you began to desire to come away from the community, or? I think I just kind of woke up. I mean, I had really been traumatized, and I didn't understand what that meant. Mm-hmm. And the person I was married to, he didn't want to be in the community. I mean, he was there because his parents told him it was time to get married. That's why, that's how he ended up married. Mm-hmm. And he was a good guy, but he didn't want to be there. So he kind of started in our house. He would watch TV, and I wasn't allowed to have like secular books. But then it started to be less of an issue, and slowly, you can't leave overnight. No one leaves overnight. But he kind of he stopped going to synagogue, which was a big deal. And he would only go on like the Sabbath. There were just small things like that would happen, and you would start to question, you'd question the community, right? Like there was a woman who lived below us who lost all of her children. Wow. She was wonderful. And we knew her really well. And she didn't want to be in the community anymore. Her husband was very abusive. We could hear him all the time. And we'd gone to the rabbi many times, and he said, we'll handle it. I'll handle it. Wow. So you think, well, he's handling it, and he's this great guy. Right. So he's better than I am, right? Like he'll handle it. And all of a sudden, all of her kids were taken away from her. She was kicked out. Wow. And she wasn't allowed to see them. And so stuff like that happened, and you go like, whoa, this could happen to me. And also, I don't know necessarily that I believe that what I'm supposed to be doing is bringing me closer to God, because you're so marred down by all of the rules and the laws that what started out seeming so beautiful, all of how God is in every part of your day, it ends up keeping you from God. I remember thinking like, oh, I haven't like really sat down and prayed in a while. I'll talk to God as I'm like doing stuff, but I'm so far from it because you're exhausted and there's something missing. And so every Friday night before the Sabbath, the women light, it's really beautiful. The women light candles for every member of their house. And the men are usually off at synagogue, and you say your prayers for the week and like the blessing over the house. And it's kind of one of the things that women are allowed to like be in charge of. And I remember praying on Friday nights and like praying to Jesus and just saying like, how did I get here? Like I know that this isn't
where you want me to be. You know, like I know that the thing that's missing here that I feel every day, like what's missing? It's you that's missing. There's so much law and no heart to it. There's no, you know, and that was hard because you think, well, I've gone so far, right? Like I've been angry at God. I wasn't passively angry. I screamed at God. I was really angry at Jesus, you know? And so I thought, well, there's no going back. Like whatever blasphemy is, I for sure committed it, you know? And I think that I started to wake up those Friday nights when I would pray. And then it was a slow process. But really when I had a baby 9 months into our marriage, and I was really battling with Christ then, you know. I thought I have to live this life, right? Like I was pregnant when I would stand over the Shabbos candles and pray. And I knew that if I left, they would take the baby. I couldn't leave.
Wow.
I couldn't leave. They would come take the baby. You know, there was no option. And I remember I was so angry at that too, right? Like it's just this, like, why would you let me come here, right? Like if you are real, which I'm starting to suspect you might be, like, why did you let me do this for? And I had my baby at St. Joseph's Hospital, which I only mention now because St. Joseph is like our family patron saint now. We love St. Joseph. And it's funny because it all started, I think it all really unraveled there when I had him. And when you have a baby boy in the community, there's a big party. There isn't if you have a girl. But so the night that I had my oldest, there was this big party, which meant that no one was at the hospital with me. I was by myself. Wow. And they wheeled me into the bedroom or the room, and right across the hall or right across the wall from me was this big crucifix. Of course, they'd been like all over the hospital and in the delivery room, and all day I'd just been like, please leave me alone, Jesus. Wow. Like clearly we're finished. Like clearly I can't come back to you. Like we both know that. And it was right there. And I just had this overwhelming feeling of like, it's so sad that this baby is never going to know Jesus. Like, how can I get him to know Jesus? And then you push that like still small voice away immediately because again, you're like, I'm an Orthodox Jew, no way to leave. And if I left, I could get the baby to Jesus, but I'm pretty sure like Jesus has a line, right? Like you don't understand until you really get it, that he will relentlessly pursue you everywhere. You know, he's not going to, if you turn back to him, he's there. And yeah, I think that it was incredibly humbling to have to do that because you feel like an idiot. You know, you feel like, well, look who I rejected. And did I really just realize that he is who he says he is? Did I really just realize that I was running from like God? So it was there, I think, in the hospital room where all of that just kind of hit me. And I knew that I had to leave, but it's a slow process to leave.
Yes.
I mean, I had another baby in the time that it took me to leave. So, yeah.
So you're in this hospital room, you're having this experience. At the same time, you're anchored already in this community that has a very different perception of the person of Jesus, right? Yes. Tell me, what was that perception?
False prophet. I mean, I think they hate him, which is funny because, you know, if you don't believe in him, why would you hate him? But false prophet, I think, more than anything else. And stupid, which is funny now looking back, because anytime anyone wants to demean something, it's easy when you just make everyone think anyone who believes that is stupid, right? Which is, I think, kind of what they do. So
you had to overcome somehow that perception of Jesus?
I didn't. At that point, I mean, I had my own, you know, belief and perception of Jesus. So I didn't really care so much what the community thought because, I think like Jesus and I were pretty like locked on one another at that point where it got to a point where I didn't care. I knew my family was going to think I was crazy and the community was going to think I was crazy. I mean, I had no other friends in Wisconsin but the community. Wow. So
at a certain point though, and you said it took another baby, but at a certain point you do leave this community and that's a process. Like that is not something obviously that happens overnight. No. So there were lots of things that slowly kind of, I felt such guilt, right? Because I had this baby with this very nice person who he's really, I mean,
I did divorce him, but he's perfectly lovely and nice. And I felt such guilt because if he had been mean, it would have been easy to just say, well, I'm leaving. But he was nice. And so there were times where I would go, okay, you've got to try, right? Like, Jesus will understand. You made a commitment. And also I didn't want to look stupid, but you push that away. So there were times where I like fought with myself about it. Like, no, you have to try. Like, it would be crazy. My family didn't think I should leave either. I mean, my family are devout Christians, and I talked to my dad, and my dad was like, no. I mean, he would hate if I said this, but he said, no, you need to make it work. Well, just stick to it.
Did he mean the marriage or life in the Orthodoxy? Community? Both?
Yeah, I mean, he knew. I think that he knew how hard it was going to be to get out, and the marriage. I think he knew that it would be the end of the marriage too, and he didn't want that for me. But yeah, it did. It took a long time, and then I would wear pants in my house. And someone would see, and then I'd get called into the rabbi to be told that, oh, you can't wear pants. Or I like to wear scarves over my hair instead of a wig. Mm-hmm. They didn't like that because then you could see that I had hair, and they wanted me to shave my head. Mm-hmm. They liked it to be like shaved down, and so they didn't like that. And so it was all those things where one day I just got tired of it. And my ex-husband was also just really getting tired of it. I mean, that was the community he grew up in, and they were the men weren't allowed to wear jeans either. There were so many little stupid things where you're just like, can I just live, my life?
Right.
And he didn't believe it. So we decided that we would move to the more modern Orthodox community that was just kind of across town. Mm-hmm. And that was really it. Once we moved there, we were done. Yeah, we didn't keep kosher or anything. Yeah. Wow. Mm-hmm.
Was that a kind of more instantaneous transition than
moving was? I mean, I think we maybe koshered the kitchen, but I had really bad postpartum depression, and my ex-husband was ready to just be done. He didn't. I had more of a problem with him leaving than he had with him leaving, because when we left, I thought, okay, like, don't you want to find a Reform temple or a conservative temple or something? You just want to leave Judaism, but what we have seen with, in the years since, I get to talk to a lot of people who've left Judaism, ultra-Orthodox Judaism. They're so burnt out. And the way that community is structured, they don't allow you to believe that there is any other way to be Jewish. So hardly anyone leaves and just becomes a lesser sect.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So you move across town to this new community. Right. The change there is more fast-paced, I guess.
Yeah, our old community felt like a shtetl, like an old Eastern European. You knew everybody knew you. There was like long side curls on the men, women, with black and white pretty much. Like if you wore gray, you could wear gray, but people would notice, right? Like you weren't allowed to. It was very ultra-Orthodox. And so the new community was modern Orthodox, which meant everything. There were women in pants, there were women who didn't cover their hair, women who wore scarves, just all sorts of things. So
it's in this community that you begin to go more in the direction of Christ. Is that right?
Yes. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I knew that my ex-husband didn't want to be any kind of Orthodox, and I didn't know enough to teach the kids. And I really had this inclination towards Christ that I was like, still, I mean, even though I had this like, oh no, you're real moment, it was like, but I can't come back to you. That was a long time of just having to understand that that's not how Jesus works. Jesus doesn't work like we work. His forgiveness is insane, right? Like he shouldn't forgive us. Right. And so, Nathan decided that he didn't want to do anything. And I told him, well, this is what I believe. If you don't want to raise the kids Jewish, could I raise them as Christians? And he was done with religion at that point. Wow. And so he said, it's funny because it's funny how you pray for things and you pray for miracles and you're like, God, why would you leave me here? How could you leave me? I remember praying as a kid, like, how could you let me be in this house? Like, just save me from this. And I did also when I was trying to leave ultra-Orthodoxy. And it's funny because you really do see where he saves you. And it's not how you would think usually, like he gives you these little miracles. And I absolutely believe one of those miracles that he gave me was Nathan saying, whatever you want, as long as I don't have to have anything to do with it. Wow. And so we agreed then that I would raise them as Christians, which again was like laughable. I didn't tell my parents for months because, they didn't want to hear it. When you pick something, you stick to it. And And so he agreed to that I could raise them as Christians, and that he would not help, but he would, always like help facilitate it. Like if they were with him, he'd have them pray before meals and things like that.
Right. So when you make this decision to raise the children Christian,
right,
were you anchored in a Christian community or?
No.
Okay.
No. So it's funny because I think at that point, my youngest, who is 9 now, I think he was maybe 1 or 2. So people ask a lot now, like, oh, how did your kids deal with the transition? Their whole lives, pretty much, they've been Christian. It was a very short time that they were in that community. But I really was looking for a church for a long time because I was disheartened when I came out. It was like this. I have a good friend from high school youth group who was at my wedding. She was always so lovely and so patient. She said, I'm praying for you. I know you're going through something. Like, I love you more than anything. And even if I think what you're doing is really wrong, I love you and I'm going to pray for you through it. So she was there at every stage.
Wow.
So she was the only one that I could really call and say like, hey, guess what? And she didn't think I was nuts. She was happy about it and everything. And so I said, okay, now I have to find a church. And that was like the whole, the problem was I didn't agree with what our church taught about it just being about faith. And so that kind of brought a whole new set of problems of like, well, now I'm responsible to raise these kids and I can raise them as Christian. How do I do that when I don't have a church that I, agree with or believe in and I was exhausted. I didn't really, so I started kind of church shopping and I would do that for a while and then get exhausted with it and then stop. And we would just do, stuff at home. I homeschool the kids and I always have. So every morning we'd have like devotions and I thought, okay, well, maybe this is just what God wants, right? And because it was the easy answer, and rarely is it ever the easy answer. So yeah, I mean, that's how I found the Catholic Church. Inevitably, is that I looked everywhere else, and it was the last place I looked. My grandmother, who I'm very close, or I was before she passed away, I was very close to her. She was Protestant Irish, very Protestant Irish. Like when I converted to Judaism, she's like, well, at least you're not a Catholic. So it was the last, I was one of those people who thought like Catholics for sure aren't Christians. They worship Mary and the saints, and it's really weird. And, it's not for me. I didn't even consider it. So I went to pretty much every other kind of church in the area over the course of years, when I could stop being tired, I would do it. And I had a friend, I'd kind of settled on just doing it myself, right? Like God is everywhere and I'll just teach the kids at home. It's fine. So like how God does, like he just when I'd kind of given up, I met this woman and we would go take our kids to the park once a week or so. And she was kind of searching for God. And I thought like, oh, that's great. Me too. And so we would talk about it a bunch. And she ended up having some really difficult marriage problems. And I said like, oh, do you have anybody to talk to? Do you have a pastor or anything like that? And she said, no, my church just got a new priest. So I'm going to go, maybe I'll go talk to him. And I thought in my head, I remember thinking like, oh, shoot, not a priest. What are they going to do? Like I just sent her into the lion's den. And she came back and she said, the next week she said, I ended up going to confession and I talked to this priest and he was great. And you know what? I've been praying about it and you should go talk to him too. And I thought, okay, sure. No, I didn't say that. I said, I took his email address. I was like, thanks so much. That's going to happen. And I don't know. I mean, it was the Holy Spirit for sure that made me like write an email. I don't know. I wouldn't have done it. But I wrote an email and I was just so frustrated. I'd been looking for Jesus and I came through Judaism and I thought, okay, I know that mostly I've been trying to do my will, right? Like mostly I was like, please just let me have Judaism, like, and go away. But, so I haven't been authentically looking for you everywhere, but please just let me find, like, wherever it is, even if it's the Catholic Church, fine, like, fine. And that was kind of how I sent the email off with, grace and poise. And the priest emailed me back And he said, let's meet and talk. And again, I thought, there's no way I'm going to a Catholic church and meeting with a priest. That's ridiculous. They don't believe in the Bible, right? Didn't they make their own? And all of these things that you're taught as a kid in the South, where there aren't that many Catholics. I think I knew one. I knew one Catholic and one Jewish girl, and that was it. And so and also at that point, I was thinking, I really just need to get the kids somewhere, right? Because I'm going to hell for sure. So I just need to get the kids somewhere. I can raise them as Christians. That's awesome. And so I thought, fine, like, let's just see. And I went and I talked to this priest, and he said, I told him, I guess I had kind of steered the direction of the kids, like I wanted to have them baptized. There was a level of like protection that I thought would come with having them baptized, like as far as the Jewish community was still a threat to take them away. And so I thought, okay, like I want to have them baptized. I want to get them into church, and that's what I want for them. And I'm finished talking, and he goes, "You don't think you've been forgiven, do you?" And I just like lost it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And that was kind of the beginning for me, is I knew I wasn't really able to trust any other church authority figures, especially after ultra-Orthodox Judaism, where I saw the corruption. That's what you hear about in every sect of anything is they're corrupt. And so when I had come out of that and I talked to different pastors and things, that was usually what would turn me off, is that I didn't think I could trust them. And so this priest, talking to him, this light bulb clicked, and I was like, oh, he has to be just as crazy as I am, because didn't he give up like a significant part of his life to follow God, right? So everybody else had kind of, over the course of years, looked at me like I was nuts, for like, just give God up. Why do you keep looking for him? He clearly does not want to be found by you. And so that was kind of what it was. And then I started learning about the church and realized, it was that I had been taught wrong about it. Yeah.
And so it was from that conversation that your relationship with the church began to take form and emerge.
Yep.
And when was it that you officially came into the church?
I think so. That was December. I think it was that Easter.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And so now you're Catholic.
That's right. Yeah.
Right? And you're raising your children as Catholics. Right. One of your children wants to become a priest.
He does.
Right?
Yeah, he does.
And you're homeschooling them. But now you've put yourself forward to work with women who are coming out of the Orthodox community in a way similar to your experience, right?
Right.
How did you come into that work?
Accidentally. I really didn't want to. I had a good friend whose name is Jackie, and when we were leaving the community, it was really difficult. We lost all of our friends. We lost family. We lost everyone that we knew. We had to start all over again. And Jackie happened to be leaving around the same time. Our years kind of overlapped. And so we would meet, and we met for the first time at the Cheesecake Factory when we stopped keeping kosher, and that was like a big deal. And so we just kind of kept meeting and talking, and we needed to process all of this stuff that we went through, because it was just a deep level of trauma, and it helped both of us so much. And then we would get Facebook messages and emails from other women who knew that we had left, because officially they hated it, right? Officially everyone was like, don't talk to them. They left, they're going to hell. But people are curious, and they want to know why, and they want to know how difficult was it, and is it worth it? And all of those things, we would get these questions from people still in the community. And so Jackie, she thought that we should do something to help, but we didn't know what. Like, how do you help these women who aren't allowed to talk to you? You can't go into the community. So she had the idea of doing a podcast where we would talk to women about their experiences, because since we've left, we've met just hundreds of women who have left, and their stories vary. I mean, there's every kind of story. Women who lose their kids, women who stay Jewish but just kind of like find their own way. Women who like are Catholic now,
Right.
All sorts of things. And so we found that like when we shared our story with each other, it healed us so much that we thought maybe it would help heal others. And we found that it really has. And in addition to that, we do like 1 week where we feature a woman's story and talk to her about like how her experience and what she's doing now and things like that. And then the other week we talk about a topic where we'll talk about like family purity laws and kind of explain like what is a mikvah and why is a woman unclean when she's on her period and all those things that like they don't talk about and they don't talk about within the community. So since we've started, we've had women reach out to us who are ultra-Orthodox and say, I didn't know that. Is that really true? Like, can you, and they're not allowed to learn the Torah.
Wow.
So there are so many things that they don't know.
What's the rationale for why they can't learn the Torah?
Well, I mean, how do you keep women down, right? Like anyone, how do you keep them down? You give them no information. And you're telling these women that they have to shave their heads, that they're not allowed to touch their husbands, that they have to basically become servants, because that's what you essentially are, because God wants you to. So if you let them dig around and see that God never said that, that the mikvah, like in the Torah, the mikvah for a woman to go like cleanse herself to become clean, all she has to do is wash her hair and like shower off, and then she can go in the mikvah. Now it's a 2-hour process, and it ends with her being required to have sex with her husband. Like required. She's not allowed to say no. So it's like this facilitated rape that goes on in these communities.
Right, because the choice is either that or you're kicked out of the community. Or
he'll do that anyway. I mean, I don't know any woman who has, I haven't talked to any that have said no. I'm sure some have. But that's how they keep them down, I think. I mean, I'm sure there are other reasons that they would give, but...
Are there commonalities? You said that you've worked with hundreds of these women.
Well, I've talked to a bunch of them. We have, we're not at hundreds yet, but the podcast, we've talked to a bunch,
Got it.
Yeah.
Are there commonalities in the stories for why women left? Is each story radically different, or are there threads that kind of combine and bring these stories together?
I think that we've interviewed the podcast, like Jackie and I have talked to separately, like probably really hundreds, but like for the podcast, we've talked to probably about 30 or 40 so far. And it varies. I mean, there are women who leave because they came from an abusive home, but there are women who leave and have a hard time leaving because they loved their family and they came from a wonderful home. I think questioning is why most of these women leave. When you start to question, when you start to ask, like, can I have a different life? Like, maybe would my life be better? Maybe would I be more connected to God if I lived in a different way? Maybe this isn't it. It's that questioning, which is why they try to kind of kill it.
When you encountered Catholicism, did you encounter an environment that welcomes questioning?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
And I imagine, because you're a writer, and we've talked about this off camera, that you must have also encountered a rich Catholic intellectual tradition with a deep creative side, right? You talked about our mutual love and interest for Flannery O'Connor.
Sure.
Right. So when you came into the Catholic Church, what were some of the things that you read or encountered that maybe showed you this is a place where you can question, where you can learn, where you can advance in human wisdom? Who were some of those figures early on that maybe you read or encountered?
So, I mean, with the priest that initially kind of like brought me into the church, like we read like Thomas Aquinas together. We read, like, it was all about questioning. That was kind of probably what my first year in the church was about, was just like reading something that I, not didn't believe, but questioned, and I was able to like process those answers. That is not something that you're allowed to do in Judaism, in ultra-Orthodox Judaism.
Right.
Yeah, because a lot of the women leave, and it's really neat. They study Gemara. There's one woman that I just talked to yesterday, and that's what she does. She studies Gemara, and it's so neat because...
For those who might not know, Gemara is...
So Gemara is... there are all these different like kind of levels of Torah. So there's the Torah and the Talmud and the Gemara is more like commentary.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Would these be like the onkelos, the different...
Like Rashi, like the rabbinical scholars, which is something that is problematic because it's men, but it's treated like law. Sure. So it's rabbis now will one day have, books that are regarded as law.
Has any of that reading, well, I guess when you were Orthodox, you weren't allowed.
No, not when I was Orthodox.
Take that reading. Yeah. But has any of that shaped now how you as a Catholic read, understand the Hebrew Scriptures? Or do you have a totally different set of interpretive principles? Or how does that experience maybe inform how you read Old Testament?
I mean, I think it's funny because I was just talking to my dad about this the other day, and I said, maybe I was so stupid that God needed to take me back to the Old Testament and have me live that for a while, because it really does inform everything that you read. There are so many times I read something and think like, oh, I lived that. So yeah, so it really does. I mean, I definitely don't recommend it for everyone, but yeah, it absolutely made me a more informed Christian, for sure.
For the women that you work with, what is something that you want them to know?
Well, it's hard because as a Christian, you want them to know that they're loved and that they're forgiven and that there's this other place for them, right? Like you want to kind of scream that at the top of your lungs, because so many times I'll get asked, like, I want what you have with God. Like what I have with God is so different, right? And they hate him when they leave. You have to throw it away. But what they experience with God is so different. They don't know about relationship. They don't know that you can speak to God and that he loves you and he cares and he forgives you. Their idea of that is Yom Kippur, right? Where they beg to be let to live one more year. And so I think that I try to be very careful talking to them about Jesus, because they, like you mentioned earlier, they don't have a great view of Jesus, and they for sure think that I'm trying to convert them, which, of course we want everyone to love Jesus and believe in Jesus. I do, I really do, but I would like them to get to that through seeing how we live, right? Like through seeing that and wanting it. I for sure don't want to beat them with words to get them to do it. That doesn't work. But yeah, I mean, I think I want them to know that they're loved. They don't feel loved. I mean, so many of them are broken, and they've been told their whole lives that they're dirty and that they're dumb, and that when they leave, that they're worth nothing, right? And so they leave with this brokenness. So many of the young girls that leave, which it's neat to see them question to the point of getting out. There was a girl who left and took her 3 sisters out, and 2 very young sisters that she had to legally take away from her alcoholic mother. And it was quite a feat. And she did it while she was in school for engineering. Wow. I mean, she's amazing. Wow. And they're not taught English the same way that most students are in high school. So these girls, if they want to go to college, have to fight for it. And she did. Wow. And when she's hurt, she has no, she's still 22, and she has no family, and she's had to pull this life up by herself. And so, you just want them to know that they're loved and not to run to the things that is so typical of a lot of them. A lot of the girls leave, and if they don't have something, right, if they don't have college or they're like wildly promiscuous. They throw God away. They have no gauge they're not allowed to look at a man that's not their dad or their brother ever. You're not allowed to look at them. If I would pass a man on the street, you look at the ground. Wow. So they have no gauge of what is okay and what's not, right? Their modesty, once they throw that out. So a lot of them leave and they go to drugs, and it's very hard. So you want them to know that like they're loved and they're wonderful, and they can do anything.
In your story, you have found through this process forgiveness, reconciliation, balance,
right,
hope. What would you say are the 3 things, despite the time of turbulence that you lived through, what are 3 things that you know to be absolutely true of God and his love for you through this whole experience?
I think the biggest is that there's nothing I can do that will separate me from that love, right? Like he loves us and will forgive us. There's nothing we can do. I think that's just like, that's amazing. I still am blown away by that. And I think like I came to a better understanding of what his sacrifice for us on the cross was, how he became sin. That's for God to become sin, for like a sinless to take on all of the sin in the world. I mean, I had no concept of that before. And so I think knowing that is true just changes how I live, right. And then the third, I like that you put me on the spot. Thanks a lot. The third thing that I know to be true. I think that, I think that his presence is really there in the Eucharist. That wasn't something that I had any concept of before. Right. And when I came to the church looking for Jesus, I thought it was just hilarious that I had said for so long, I'm looking for Jesus. And he's right there.
Right.
He's right there for us.
Right.
So
this time has been amazing, Callie.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much. Your story is incredible. And I'm really moved by the fact that you're a real woman of hope, of deep prayer, of a message of reconciliation. I think all of us can learn from. So thank you.
Thanks very much
for being with us.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Cream City Conversations. In the comment section below, please share your experiences with extremism and finding a new path in Christianity. And while you're at it, please consider subscribing to our channel and sharing our videos on your social media accounts. Help us make Cream City Conversations a place where you can connect with Milwaukee's digital Catholic community.